Okay, I'm going to play something and then I'm going to interject during the playing of this audio because I have a lot to say concerning it and I agree with, I want to say 100% of what's being said on um, this podcast. So let's get into it. I got the doors open. I hope it's not going to make a lot of noise. But let's start playing. The trad wife anti birth control rhetoric is just red pill for women. It's just red pill for women. It's been rebranded. It's softened. I even hate the new agey rhetoric of, well, when you're with the right man, you'll submit because you're in your feminine energy. Excuse me? First of all, like aggression is feminine. Protection is feminine. Yeah. Rage is feminine. Again, it narrows the. When she says protection is feminine, that's what women are supposed to do concerning their children. They're not supposed to lay down and be doormats for anybody that's trying to harm their family or their children. So to say being aggressive or willing to fight for what you love is being non-feminine is a lie. That's one. Let's continue. Window of where women can exist, that you're not truly in your feminine unless you're submissive. Okay. You can go do that in your corner.
Hello, and welcome to the Politics Girl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. So, let's get into it. I'm so excited for today's.
Let me just say this. Submissive looks many different ways, right? And being with a significant other, in order for a relationship to last, there's submission coming from both sides. It doesn't matter whether you're in a heterosexual relationship. There is a form of submission that comes from the husband and the wife unto each other. And if you're in a gay marriage, same thing goes. So submission is being touted as looking like one thing. It does not look like one thing. Okay? Let's continue.
Podcast, because our guest is someone I really admire and I have loved learning from over the past years. Monty Bader.
Again.
Monty is a cultural critic, a musician, a podcaster who was raised deeply steeped in Christian fundamentalism and conservative politics. She pursued theological studies in Israel and spent her life immersed in environments that emphasized obedience and traditional gender roles. However, over time, she began to question and eventually deconstruct her belief systems. She has now become a powerful voice for cultural change and offers everything from Bible study classes to people who are also deconstructing their faith to a podcast called Flipping Tables, which is a religious deconstruction of alt-right fundamentalism, American history, and our political climate. Monty uses her experiences in Christian fundamentalism, Christian nationalism, and theocratic politics to help others understand religious dogma and our whitewashed version of American history. And as we watch these Christian fundamentalists associated with this administration use religion to degrade women, to justify war, to reverse progress, I wanted to have Monty on to discuss.
Let me just interject. Monty, and I hope you go check her out. Monty was raised in a white nationalist Christian religion. Not just Christianity, but actual white supremacy, and she will tell you about that.
Women's rights, our vote, our place in the world, and our place in this country, and what it would look like for both men and women if these extremists get their way. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, podcast host, musician, and writer, Monty Bader. Welcome, Monty.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for joining me. I've been such a fan of yours for years, and you're just an absolute badass. And in my mind, you are this intellectual and theological superstar. So I wanted to have you on for many, many reasons, but particularly as we watch America's growing contempt, and maybe dare I say hatred for women right now. You were raised in this particularly fundamentalist society with very traditional gender roles. When you look around at what's going on right now with this administration and its enablers from the Heritage Foundation all the way to the Groyper movement?
Let me just say this. The hatred of women is not a new thing. It has been throughout history, when you see in ancient civilizations where they would let priests and religious leaders have sex with the wife, soon to be wife, before the husband, and have done like unclean practices of making those women sit on what the Bible calls a teraphim. Do I want to say the word just in case people don't understand what I'm getting at? So stone teraphims in the shape of a penis. Okay, let me just say that. And so this hatred of women is not a new thing. This hatred and disrespect of women is throughout history. It's throughout different cultures. It is throughout different ancient civilizations. It has happened over and over and over throughout thousands of years, hundreds of years. It's not new. It's only new to some people that don't see the connection between ancient historical events and what's happening today. It's not new.
What do you think that they have planned for women?
Thankfully, they're becoming much more clear about it. There's a lot less pretense than it used to be, but what's happening right now was exactly the movement I was trained to be a part of. I was also trained, because of my intelligence, to be one of the emissaries of their bidding, if you will, because they always use a few women to help keep the other women in line. But the ultimate goal is to restrict women to the home, to strip them of their civil rights, their right to vote, to reestablish headship voting, create a society where women have no recourse, where a woman's only means of survival is marriage, family, husband, that she can't leave, regardless of how terrible he is, because it's an institution built on hierarchy where the male headship is absolute and God-given. So therefore, you cannot rebuff that headship. And that's eventually the goal.
Wow. Okay, so what if you don't believe in American Christianity? You're just supposed to go along with that? It's sort of like an American Taliban kind of situation?
It's exactly the American Taliban. It's why so many far-right groups are actually very supportive of how the Taliban treats women. They would like to do the same thing, just under a different brand. Ultimately, it is about Christian nationalism, unlike Christianity, because there's a big difference between the two things. Christianity is about Christ and the world and everybody's place in it. Christian nationalism is about country and power, is really a primary distinction. But within Christian nationalism,
Christian nationalism is a racial identity as well. It is not just about the politics of nation building and things like that. It literally is about a construct. Nobody fits in a white neo-Nazi, white nationalist ideology other than so-called white people, and not even all the white people. They are selecting who they feel in the hierarchy belong in that nationalist agenda.
There's no space for religious plurality. They believe that you have the right to worship how they think you should worship, in alignment with their doctrine, in alignment with their faith. They do not believe that you have the right to practice, live, and love as you see fit. Because if this wasn't about power, they would simply be, oh, well, this is what I believe. I'm going to go over here to this corner, and this is how we're going to live, and this is what we think is right. And in our families, we're not going to have the women vote, because these women are still voting in these conservative movements as of right now, because they need the votes.
So these white nationalists say they believe in Jesus Christ, right? But do they really? Because if they believed in Jesus Christ, for one, was not a white man. And two, Jesus Christ talked about grafting, like the olive branch. And what he meant by that is, because he was a Jew. Okay, he was Jewish. He's from the line of Judah. Okay? And when he said he grafted in, the people he grafted in were of all different religions, mainly, I can't say religions, they were from different ethnic backgrounds and cultures. And if you go to Revelation, when it talks about all the beings around the throne of God, it said that all tribes, peoples, and tongues were around that seat of God. White nationalists don't believe in the equality of sharing that that godship They do not believe that, for one, Jesus himself came in the form of a white man. He did not come in the form of a white man. So they don't believe in his color being anything other than white, which was, I mean, there's a lot to that. It's like going down a rabbit hole with that. Because the depiction of Jesus that people worship and that they use in their churches and stuff was an actual gay man. Was it Michelangelo? I can't think of who the artist was. When they came into his priest came into his bedroom and saw this man there. What Michelangelo? I think it was Michelangelo. I'm gonna have to look at the information. He said that this was his model for Jesus. He used this gay man because they were in a gay relationship. And that's another thing. This nationalistic religious agenda, a lot of the men are gay. A lot of them are gay, and they are going against the gay community and the gay rights community. However, it doesn't stop them themselves from being gay, homosexual. It does not stop them from doing that. But they condemn homosexuality, but that's exactly what they are, a lot of them. And you can see it in Trump's administration and a lot of the Republicans that are pushing that agenda. Let me continue.
But if it was really about just them believing that that's how it is supposed to be, that's how they would live, instead of trying to legislate it on other people. But they don't believe in religious plurality.
Yeah. So the whole concept of the separation of church and state, or there being no national religion, or everything our country was kind of based on, is not what they believe. And it's a total sort of usurping of those ideas, which is why they seem so...
Oh, dang. Got a phone call. Let me just say this. Our founding fathers didn't base our Constitution on religion. They did not.
Easily able to adjust any constitutional rights as it fits to them.
Yes, and it's also why they peddle the idea, the lie so hard that we're a Christian nation, we were founded on Christian principles, versus being founded so very clearly in our founding documents and the writings of the founding fathers on the separation of church and state.
Exactly.
Even Roger Williams, who founded the Baptist denomination, understood the security and the safety that the church gets from the separation of church and state. But the reason they peddle that lie so hard is to be able to make an excuse to institute their religion as law.
So we're seeing this huge rise in Christian nationalism, which, as you define, is completely different than Christianity itself. And I think about everyone from Pete Hegseth and his opinions on women in combat, women who are abused in the armed forces, don't bother coming to tell us that because you're just ruining some guy's career, to the spiritual and thought leaders like Joel Webbon and Wesley Todd, saying that women should just shut up and stop competing with men. And like you're saying, promoting this family vote idea where women don't get to call the shots anymore. I mean, clearly these men have a very clear sense of what women's place is in society. And they're part of a growing movement to not only put us back in that place, but...
I just want to ask the men, would you be okay with, because Trump is a convicted rapist. Hegseth had been accused of rape himself. A lot of the people in his administration have done these type of foul things towards women and children. Would you be okay with your daughter, whom you love, to be forced into a relationship and a marriage with a man who's going to utterly abuse her and possibly your grandchildren? Are you okay with that? That's my question. Because this agenda that these white nationalists are pushing is exactly that. It will happen because they want to push for 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds to be in subjection to men. And how long down the line and how many years will it take before they go 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, your female daughters, and putting them in subjection to these men, these abusive men? Are you okay with that? Would you be okay with that? I have to ask any man who's a father of a girl, would you be okay with that? Please answer me in the comment section.
Make sure we can't get ourselves out of it again by taking our vote. I think of everything from the SAVE Act, which is clearly a way to disenfranchise women, even though they say it's a voter ID bill, to this ever-growing conversation to repeal the 19th Amendment completely. And this is no longer a fringe idea, right? Like, this is really where they're functioning from.
Yes. And then this has been, I mean, I grew up in the 90s, and this has been since I was a kid. It was never fringe. It was just quiet. So in the church I grew up in, it was very much played as like, well, ideally, you know, the father of the household would vote for everyone in the family. Ideally, your dad would take care of you until your husband can take care of you. So the belief system was the same. The proposition was different, because if they came out and said, we're going to take away women's...
Even if a husband was taking his whole family's and steering the ship or steering the car, and didn't take into account for his wife and children's viewpoints of what was going to take place. And even if he did take into account his wife and children's viewpoints, and he voted, and it was something against the hierarchy of this patriarchy, this dysfunctional patriarchy, do you think he would have a vote any longer? Do you think that man, if he stood up in the eventuality that this Project 2025 comes into full fruition, do you think that those men who they are giving so-called power of head of household over their families, and they didn't want their 12-year-old or 13-year-old daughter to be sold in subjection to this patriarchy of men, groups of men, into marriage, and he said no, how long do you think that man's vote would stand? Again, questions, answer the questions in the comment section. How long do you think it would take for them to take that particular man's power away from him as head of household, and his vote be taken away? Because they're trying to take women's vote away. They're trying to take the black vote away. They've been already targeting the Hispanic vote. How long do you think it would take for them to take that white man's vote away when it comes to his family and being head of household, if he was out of alignment with what they and their agenda wanted to do? How long do you think it would take for them to take his vote? Let's continue.
Right to vote. If they came out and said, we're going to attack birth control, which is also part of this movement, then they would lose the vote. They would lose people. It would derail. So they had to play subtle long enough to get enough power. And now they believe they have enough power, which is why one of the great things about what's happening, which is a terrible sentence to say, but one of the great things that's happening is there's no pretense anymore. Yeah. There's no pretense. There's no hiding it. They're being very clear about what it is they want to do. But that has always been the goal. The Quiverful movement, which is the foundation of this headship voting, this idea of pushing women back in the home, that feminism is the true great enemy, has really been building since the 70s. The rise of the new moral majority that showed up after Nixon is really where all of this came from. And it became this political movement to hijack American systems and create it in their own image.
Yeah, and they've been very, very effective at doing it. It's sort of where the abortion, came from. It's how Reagan got elected. It's how the Heritage Foundation first found themselves, basically dictating Republican policy. I think about Scott Yanner, who is part of the Heritage Foundation, and how he recently did a speech saying that every effort has to be made to not recruit women into engineering or med school or law school or the trades, that we should be celebrating male excellence in all facets of life, because successful men mean happier citizens and a stronger nation. And I'm like, yeah, maybe because unhappy men kill people, right? They kill people, from their spouse to school children to themselves. They rape and torture children. We've seen this now, that we're in this position now where unhappy men act out on society. So in some ways you could argue his argument that if men had all the power and men had all the jobs and women were subjugated to them, they would be happier. And you're like, but society would not be happier. The men would be happier. He went on to say that medicated quarrelsome, meddlesome women gain their meaning through the participation in the global market, but it makes them agents of the new world and not new life. And those kind of women are the ones that are the backbone of every left-wing cosmopolitan party. And he's talking about everything from Britain to the Democratic Party here in America. But if women have fewer options, they're going to have more children, then they will be bound more tightly to the men in their life. And it's this idea that we have to drag women back to when they only had the choice to submit. And that's going to make the country a better place. And I have to tell you, as a woman who also grew up in the 90s and did not grow up in a Christian fundamentalist environment, this seems antithetical to everything I was taught, which was you could be anything you want to be. You know, you can do anything you want to do. Women are just as good as boys. And now I'm going, oh, that was never how a lot of these men ever believed.
I caught the tail end of it because I was a little in 90s, but it was still happening. And I remember those conversations occurring, and it just has grown in steam and been rebranded going throughout all of this. But it's really about dependency. Because there's a couple gaping enormous flaws in this logic that they refuse to address. And the first is these repeated claims that the natural state of woman is in submission, having children. If it was natural, it wouldn't require violence, force, indoctrination, or a legal system to enforce it. It's not natural. It's natural for some women, but the only way that you can believe that all women are meant to be in the home with kids, this is all of their natural state, is if you do not believe that women are unique people. They're just vessels. And in their belief system, the womb is a weapon of this ongoing Christian war. That's the first problem. And then the second problem is that you have 51% of the population who is now a major player in the workforce, in small businesses. You are talking about crushing your own economy for the sake of your own greed and your own selfishness. And you're right that when men are unhappy, the response is violence. And we do have this kind of ongoing question of, you know, quote, the male loneliness epidemic. I call it male accountability. There's a series of flaws within this argument that they won't address because
and this is another thing. Even if the men are not violating their children and their wives, men have a higher suicide rate. So if men are not happy, when she was talking about the violence, it doesn't have to be necessarily violence against somebody else, which we already know does exist. But it's also violence against themselves. They will take themselves out of this world. So how do you fix that? We've created an environment, and we have a government right now who is very anti-mental well-being and getting help for men who do feel on the brink of destruction and or suicide or whatever the case may be. There's no help for them. So while we're sitting here talking about fixing things, and listen, men who were married in the 30s, 40s, and 50s left their wives and their children. And when they left their wives and children high and dry, there was no resources for the wives and children. But when men are unhappy, you're not going to force them in a marriage and they stay. Throughout history, it's been shown. So I don't know what this Project 2025 thinks that is going to exist, that is going to help men. It's not. They're going to bring back men into the position of violence against their wives. Right now, they're kind of in check because they know that there's accountability and that they can pretty much go to prison for harming their children and their wives. But if you take those safety rails off the road for them, they're going to go right back to what has happened in the past in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and beyond. And they're going to do exactly what they did before when they were unhappy. And you force them into the workforce as the sole provider for their families. Depends on the man. My dad was a sole provider. He was okay with it. He had no issues. But every man ain't built like that. So forcing every man into that paradigm is not going to work. I'm just saying, it's not.
ultimately it's just about getting as much power as they can and entrapping women, which is this huge push to have as many kids as you can, get married young, because when you're barefoot, pregnant, no work history, and they don't want to vote for a livable wage, because as pro-life as they claim to be, they sure don't care about you once you get here.
No.
Once you're here and you're actually born, they don't give a shit about you. The goal is to keep women so dependent they can't leave, ultimately. Because if you're in an abusive marriage, or God forbid your husband dies and you have no work history, you can only get minimum wage. Our minimum wage isn't enough to raise children on.
No.
Then what's your option? Well, your option is to get married again as quickly as you can.
Absolutely. I mean, the Heritage Foundation, who we should remind people are the people that wrote Project 2025, which we are systematically checking off during the Trump administration. They're laying this out now, as you're saying, without apology. They're not trying to soften the delivery anymore. They literally believe in a world where women are not fully human beings, who are not moving through the world or society with autonomy, but they're sort of pieces that can be placed inside this structure, just, designed by men to serve men, and they can decide what we are and are not allowed to do. I mean, there is very clearly an active movement to remove women from the workplace, to remove women from higher education. And just so people understand, when this government defunded the Women's Bureau of Department of Labor, they basically said that helping women in the workforce is a relic of the past. We no longer need to do that. In many ways, the same way they argued that we no longer needed the Civil Rights Act because racism was over. Women's apprenticeships are being cut. Women are not being elevated in the military when they deserve it. Military committees in general to advance women in the armed services have been shut down. Private companies have stopped reporting on women in leadership. The New York Times.
I want to pull it back again because this is about Christian nationalism. So just to show you the violence, that there is no care for the kids, right? Or children. What did King Herod do? And I know this is from the past. He tried to kill Jesus because the prophecy said that this king of Nazareth was going to be born, right? And he went around and he killed the firstborn son, of all these different townships where they thought that Jesus was, in these different homes, and killed all those babies, those boy babies. That mindset still exists. Do you think that these men who follow Christianity don't have that same mindset that King Herod had? Do you think that they don't? Look what they've done to all the immigrants. You don't think that that's something that they would try to do? If there was a prophecy again, and there was going to be, let's just say, another prophetic leader coming, you don't think they would try to do that? There is no care for children. I'm sorry. There's no love. There's no care for these type of ideologies and agendas that are ruling powers. There's just none. Let me continue.
Just reported that 212,000 women have left the American workforce since January, while 44,000 men have entered it. The gender pay gap is actually widening, not shrinking. And 45% of American women are their family's primary breadwinner, with that number going up to 70% when it comes to Black women. So it seems like you said, they're actually getting rid of their own tax base. If you take these opportunities from people who are such a huge part of the workforce and you put them back in the home, what really happens is more kids go hungry, less rent is paid, and your tax revenue for your country just dips. What do you think about that?
I think it ultimately
I want to just say this. These white nationalists don't care if they collapse the United States economic structure. They don't care. They have an agenda, and they don't care who they pull out of the workforce. All they care is about reconstructing the workforce that puts white males in seats of power. That's all they care about. So if you think they care about pulling immigrants, and it was never about violent illegals in the country, and they wanted to deport them. It's about anybody who is in the workforce, who is upholding the structure of this economy. They want to break it all down. So they've already hit the immigrants, Hispanic immigrants, and Haitian immigrants and all these different ethnic groups and stuff. And they've been hitting black women in jobs, and they're hitting women. So do you think they care? They do not care. They want to reposition and reconstruct the workforce and putting white males in the hierarchy of that structure in all positions, every single position.
Don't care, and they really believe that they can replace the entire system with men. It's one of those, what was Trump's quote, don't buy your child 17 dolls or whatever he says.
Yeah,
Like,
just
just get by with less. Yeah, just get by with less.
$2 dime, that one.
Yeah, give $2, whatever it was. But the whole point of it is like, well, just buckle up and it'll work out. And that's the same thing I don't know if you saw Isabel Brown at CPAC. She was the girl that got on stage and was like, if you're not teaching your kids to have kids before they're ready and more than they can afford, this plays into this ideology of God's going to help you figure it out. But then when you have more kids than you can afford and you're neglecting them and can't feed them and abusing them, then they're like, well, why did you have so many kids?
Exactly.
What's your problem? Why were you so irresponsible? But it's ultimately this idea of we're just going to get power into the hands of men and then everything's going to be fine. And then it's all going to work out and you just need to shut up and deal with it. Because here's the other thing. They have this rhetoric going and
let me just say this. I give black women so much credit on social media because they were ahead of the curve and ahead of the game when they saw these type of mammies coming out. However, these are so-called white mammies, okay? These white mammies have been pushing this dysfunctional patriarchy and telling women that go ahead and have children, talking about white women, go ahead and have children even if you cannot afford them. And they've cut all the programs. Tell me how that makes sense. To tell a woman to bring children into this world, or young girls, age 15, and probably even below, because they're working on that, to bring in children that they themselves can't even support themselves, let alone children. How irresponsible is that? They know damn well those children are not going to be cared for and taken care of. They're going to be in poverty. And it makes it easier, and I've said this before, it makes it easier for men like Trump and Epstein to be able to violate children like that, because when you push children like that into poverty, and somebody like an Epstein or the sex trafficking ring that is happening to throw a couple dollars towards these little kids and their mothers and fathers, they can manipulate any children and be able to violate any children. That is not a country I personally want to live in. I do not want to live in a country where children will have the potential to be violated in mass.
Has especially been popularized in the manosphere and red pill and the groypers. This idea that women's right to vote is what's ruined the country, right?
Yep.
That women, leftist, childless, leftist, liberal women are the problem. But here's the thing. We have never had a female president. We have never had a female-led Congress. Only recently did we have a female state legislature that even had an equal amount of women. Men have had their hands on the reins of power this entire time.
Exactly.
There has not been a moment of time in the history of this nation where women have led. So if you have a problem with the results, blame the men in power. You want to walk around claiming that men built everything, you have a problem with it, then blame the men. You don't get to give them credit for building everything and then be mad about what's been built. Yes, women have had the right to vote, but women have had no leadership, no power, no control. We have not spearheaded the country at any point, and they still want to create this dialogue as if we're to blame, as if we're the ones leading the charge, and we have never led the charge, ever. I happen to be of the opinion that if women were leading, we would be in a much better position.
Exactly.
But
Well, it
the
depends
whole
on the
rhetoric
woman.
that women have somehow been able to take the vote and skew everything so far that we're the reason everything's falling. No, the reason everything's falling is because since Ronald Reagan in particular, you have allowed them to give tax breaks to the wealthy while they claim they're standing for you, and they're telling you it's going to trickle down on your head, and what they're doing is pissing on your head. And you're allowing them to do it over and over and over and over, even though they have shown you they don't give a shit about you.
Facts.
And now you're blaming everyone who's around you suffering the same instead of the people at the top that are.
Anyways, there's a lot of good points being brought out on this blog talk. And kudos to the two ladies for bringing those very blaring, blatant, obvious viewpoints and observations of what is happening and transpiring in this country to the forefront. Anyways, have a good night and take care.